Hello, and welcome to the webinar, Embracing the Future of Event Marketing, Hybrid Events as the New Normal. My name is Brittany Sullivan with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. I have a few administrative details to share with you, and then I will turn things over to our esteemed speakers. First, we would like to thank Bonsai for their partnership with today's event. They've been wonderful partners to Argyle and are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. So thank you again to Bonsai. We appreciate you joining us today. We also welcome you to stay socially connected during today's event. For those of you who are active tweeters, please follow us on Twitter at Argyle Exec Forum, and also be sure to follow Argyle on LinkedIn for special announcements. I also wanted to take a moment to touch on our content neutrality policy, which we've curated based on the feedback we've received over the years from our members. Argyle is very proud and protective of this policy as it reflects our commitment to ensure the neutrality and overall value of the content presented at our events. We have worked closely with our speaking faculty to ensure that you receive a set of balanced and neutral viewpoints during the session today, and we truly appreciate our members' support of this policy. Finally, and most importantly, we would love to hear from you. So please submit all questions that come up during today's event into the chat section of the interface. Following the discussion, we have set aside time for our speakers to weigh in on these questions. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our moderator, Suzanne Taylor, Senior Director, Head of Global Brand and Event Marketing at Xandr. We are pleased to have Suzanne and our speakers here with us for the webinar, Embracing the Future of Event Marketing, Hybrid Events as the New Normal. Welcome,
Thank you
Suzanne,
so much, Brittany and the Argyle team for having me. I'm Suzanne Taylor. As Brittany mentioned, I'm the head of Global Brand and Event Marketing at Xandr, which is AT&T and Warner Media's advertising business, built after the acquisition of AT&T of AppNexus in 2018. I've been in the events world now, working for various verticals at companies like Morgan Stanley, UBS, Citi, and PubMatic, and very excited to be on this panel. And would love to kick off introductions with the panelists here today. We'll start off with Kimber Lancaster, Director of Strategic Event Marketing at PagerDuty. If you would like to tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Sure. My name is Kimber, I said like timber, and I have been specializing in the B2B SaaS space for engineers and developers for the better part of the last decade. And prior to that, I worked with brands in New York City doing special events.
Next, we have Kirk Bilofer, Chief Revenue Officer at Bonsai.
Hi, welcome everybody. I'm Kirk. I'm the CRO and CMO for Bonsai, so super excited to be here. Been doing the B2B space before SaaS even existed. I'm probably the oldest on this panel, but the great thing is people still buy from people, and marketers still have the same job they've always done, which is how do you build engagement and excitement around the product.
Awesome. And last but not least, we have Natalia Rybuka, Senior Director of Event Marketing at Attentive.
Hi, everyone. My name is Natalia. I'm at Attentive, which is a text marketing messaging solution for e-commerce brands. I've spent most of my career in MarTech, also did a stint in the experiential marketing agency space. I've been in that events for over 15 years, and I'm excited to be here.
Well, welcome everyone. Needless to say, it's been an incredible last, I guess at this point, 14 plus months, especially for event marketers. I know in our business, we've had to pivot our strategy and to say that trying to figure out how to do that while jumping through hoops of fire, everything else going on in the world. So that's an understatement by any stretch of the words. So to kick off, let's chat events. Considering how important event marketing is for most organizations, businesses, can you share your experience from the past year, how you've embraced this sort of new reality and pivoted your strategies? Natalia, let's start with you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I feel like I've been asked this question so many times. It's like we were living this for like the next decade. But I had actually just started in February at Attentive. I've never done virtual events, beyond live streaming, live events. So I actually thought it was a great opportunity after like the initial shock of like, where's my career going? Live events are really expensive and you can only be present at so many. And as a startup, Attentive, it really allowed us to an opportunity to have our brand and product out in the world and be omnipresent in our industry. I think we would have never been able to accomplish that with live events. So I didn't really wait to figure out all the details. I didn't know. I think that would have taken forever. And then you're like a little late to the game. So we kind of just jumped in, started sponsoring events in our industry, started creating proprietary events. I think for sponsored events, what was really tricky is really we're thinking how we create the engine, these cold lists that were just sent to us after the event. Like, how do you get people to engage with your brand? So we really had to create a system in partnership with sales. We had to retrain salespeople as well on how to follow up on leads and how to engage with prospects in the virtual space. And at the same time, with our proprietary events, we had to create a community and engagement through those events. What I thought of, what are people going through right now? If you're sitting at home, what is the experience you're going to look for? And really, we wanted to be attentive, live and breathe our brand. SMS was becoming a vital tool for e-commerce, and we really, through events, we're there to support brands in learning and launching programs. And events was a huge part of that.
That's great. So much compacted into that answer, and there's so many things we'll definitely get into a little bit more throughout the course of this webinar. But Kirk, I'd love to hear your perspective since you're in a slightly different business.
Yeah. So, I mean, what's interesting is, most of our customers did just what Natalia said. Like, some were really cautious and waited in, and some people were like, this is just how it is, and we still got to make our numbers, so let's just jump in and figure out what happens. And I think where we see our customers sitting now is that they realize virtual events are sort of this great equalizer, meaning you don't have to physically locate where the live event is, or you don't have to be able to afford a ticket or not have any other conflicts to attend that event. So it's allowed them to go very, very broad, meaning like a geographic or an industry focus, but also be very precise with their targeting. And so I think that's what's important is, I'm ex-SAP, right? So when we would do our big events, you get people that were top of funnel, mid funnel, and then existing customers. And so having tracks and breakout rooms that address all those needs becomes a very, very difficult sort of experience to manage. And with virtual events, you can break up your entire buyer's journey, have very, very specific steps and targeted messaging and curated content, and do what we like to call this sort of micro targeting of events. So I think it's awesome. I also think it plays to marketing superpower, which is that they do a great job in engaging with an audience and maybe moving people through the buyer's journey. Where when you do these in-person events, oftentimes people just pack through. And it could be like your aunt and uncle sitting in the back row. They just don't want to see any empty seats. But with virtual events, you can get 10 or 15 people on a call, and it could still be very worthwhile as you answer their questions and you introduce some other existing customers. And so I think that sort of small curated experience is really, really important in events, and virtual is just
That's great. I have a follow-up question for you in just a minute on that, especially as the marketing funnel, talking a little bit more there. But Kimber, I'd love to hear your perspective on this and how you have sort of pivoted strategies.
Natalia and Kurt actually hit on a lot of things already, very similarly to them. In a very short window of time, we saw all of our engagement opportunities kind of disappear, and we had to move very quickly. We actually were one of the first companies, this is a previous employer, to put together a proprietary event that had never happened before, was virtual only, and was for the whole industry, just because we saw all these awesome speakers who had lost their opportunities to share all of their expertise. And so we wanted to provide a new forum for them. And so early on in the pandemic, I saw a lot of the similar things that these two have shared. Really broad reach, people who were could join in from anywhere, and we were able to get higher numbers at lower costs than we were before. But as the year evolved, everyone got really tired of being separated from each other and from staring at a screen. So the micro targeting that Kurt is talking about is where we've evolved to now, because people really need to know that where they're going to show up at is going to be engaging, and they're going to get value out of it, because there's so many people doing these now, and there's so many competing interests for their time, where we've had to become more sensitive to all of the distractions in the background. Like, I don't know if you can hear my dog barking, but everyone's dealing with a lot of different things. So that content is king aspect just became even more important, so that people knew exactly why they needed to show up and that this was being put together specifically for them, and that when they left, they're going to have something of value that they can take back to make their work easier or make their outcomes greater.
I definitely want to touch on content a little bit later in this, but I want to go back to Kurt. Thinking holistically about your strategy and as the Chief Revenue Officer, what role does virtual play now? I know that virtual has always sort of played a little bit of a role, but in your marketing funnel currently, have you had to change your client acquisition strategy dramatically? And sort of how is that going for you?
Yeah, so I mean, I think, purely from a selfish sales standpoint, the problem is that you can no longer go to a corporate office and meet with the buying committee, right? And any enterprise software or purchase over 10 or 15K requires multiple touch points. And so the challenge we have is a lot of our deals are single threaded, and that's not specific to us. That's sort of the trend that's happening right now. But you still ultimately need to engage with the CFO, and you need to engage with the other stakeholders in the decision-making process. But you don't always know who they are. And so for me, like mid-funnel activities is probably where I see like the biggest impact. Now, having said it, like top of funnel is still really, really important. But what I love is I've had 1 or 2 conversations with a prospect, and now I can curate an event where I can bring on a customer. I can invite many of them to come attend, but then I can also invite the other people that I know are going to be part of the approval process. And whether that's somebody that's more senior or targeting that audience means now I'm getting introduced to these people that ultimately are going to weigh in on the decision-making process. And so I think that mid-funnel step to me is something that virtual is just an awesome enabler on, especially because if I plan it the right way, it becomes recorded content that I can repurpose and reuse. And that, to me, like as a salesperson, that's the most exciting thing. I don't want to just have a bunch of early stage deals. I actually, once I've invested sales cycles, I really want to make sure those deals don't drop off. I improve my win rates. And I think that's super impactful. And it used to be, I'd give them case studies and I'd give them all this printed content, which some people still consume, but we're in this stage now where everybody just has fatigue. And it's not just a fatigue, like it's just, we're all tired. And I don't know what the solution is, but we're all consuming content at different times in different ways. And it's a matter of convenience as we try to balance this new thing, this new way of living. And so some people still read, but some people want to see things in video format, or they want a 5-minute segment. And so I think that's what really helps for me with the mid-stage, mid-funnel activities. I would say, at Bonsai specifically, we don't do enough of them. And it's one of the things that we're working on improving, partly because there are different sales objections in sort of the mid-stage funnel standpoints. Trying to ferret out what are those top 10 things that need to be addressed and making sure we can address them in a meaningful. And I think, Kimber talked about like engagement. Like this is where these events become so important. Is the reality is I don't need 100, but really if I can get 10 or 15 people and they can hear from a CMO where Bonsai's had an impact on their business, to me that's worth it. Versus try to get 50 to 100, sort of butts in seats the old way we used to look at events. So sorry, apologize for rambling there, but I think from a sales perspective, like marketing's job, my perspective is, and I wear both hats at Bonsai, is I want them to contribute to the pipeline, but I don't want to just have them put in sort of warm bodies. If they can help me improve my win rate, that is extremely valuable because that means I need less MQL. And that's where I think virtual is just a wonderful tool.
That's really helpful, especially as I feel like the marketing wins sometimes are not as quantifiable. Sometimes it's supported, but having those hard KPIs and those hard numbers are always great for any sort of proof points. Kind of going back to Kimber and Natalia in the intro section, shifting back to the subject of hyper targeting and audiences. At Xandr, I know we have a very global audience, which has been a big challenge for us to kind of find that right balance of how they interact with virtual platforms and time zones and languages. Also, we have a variety of client types. We have buy side, sell side. We're always trying to reach them, but also to tailor our message and our targeting. Natalia, I know your business is focused on marketers, while Kimber, your audience is primarily engineers. I'd love to hear how you're both tailoring your events for your audience types in this new virtual space. Maybe Kimber, if you could talk to us first about that.
Sure. Yeah. So first off, forgive me for overgeneralizing here. I realize there will be exceptions to the stereotypes I'm about to talk about. But for the most part, the thing that I love and the challenge with engineers and developers is they can smell a sales pitch a mile away. They're not huge fans of marketers, which means that we get the opportunity to be super straight shooters with them and just be ourselves. So when we moved to virtual, one of the things that was nice is we didn't really need to worry about branded backdrops or like bells and whistles with production. They just wanted to hear from great people and they wanted to hear how we could help make their lives easier. So that was one thing that was an added benefit for our particular audience. And I think what we found with the content specifically itself was the more technical we could get with them and the more hands-on we could get with them, the more quality conversions that we saw, because they were understanding the product, they were getting their hands on it, which is what's most important to them. And we were almost creating FOMO around that buyer's journey. They realized, here are the things I could do if I actually had my hands on this. So that was helping with us, to Kurt's point, having quality over quantity. We had a much better pipeline impact if we had 50 people in a virtual workshop for 2 hours learning how to specifically build and do something within the product versus 1,000 people tuning in for a 20-minute session for a large event. So I think that was one of the things that our particular audience helped them the most. And then the other piece of it too, which is also a generalization, is large social gatherings are also not something that all engineers or developers really want to do. That can be overwhelming. That maybe isn't the type of way that you can build relationships with them. So these virtual hospitality events, those programs, particularly with particular deals, we could bring in some of those decision makers like Kurt was talking about. So you are engaging with the C-suite and you're engaging with the developers, and you're doing it in an environment that actually is more comfortable for them. So we've seen higher engagement rates with smaller virtual hospitality programs, higher show rates, and then continue to help move people through that buyer's journey, actually a little bit more effectively than we were seeing when we were traveling there in person.
How about you? What have you been seeing?
Yeah, our audience is definitely very different. But you know, I think there is some similarities in like the product. They want to know about the product, right, and how to use it. I think as we built out our event portfolio, specifically proprietary events, you know, we really thought about what audience segments needed to be engaged in a different way. So we built like a main customer conference that had key product updates, you know, inspiring brand leaders, discussing more aspirational topics, case studies presented by customers on new ideas on how to use the SMS channel. And that event really helped to bring our brand to life and it was a quarterly event. So quarterly now we had a connection with our customers and ongoing conversation. So it was definitely more frequent than you normally would have like an annual conference. But what we wanted to engage more with was like our executive customers. There was an onslaught of wine tastings and chef nights, as everybody knows. So we took a little longer to roll this out. Wanted to create something that really mattered to the C-suite and founders of a lot of D2C companies that are our customers. So we created a unique event where they got to hear from a luminary who would present like bespoke advice on digital strategy or brand strategy, like authors and people that are like somebody they looked up to. And then they actually got to meet the speaker and ask them questions in small groups, kind of more 101. And I thought that was like for the C-suite more important to have a one-on-one experience versus a one-to-many. So that's like one way we address that segment. And we also have a lot of day-to-day users that are in the platform every day, sending text messages. And our main customer conference did a great job of providing product updates, but where we noticed a gap where day-to-day users still needed more specific how-to demos. We roll out new features all the time. So we created something called Attentive University Live, which was a workshop on features that customers said they wanted to learn more about and survey reports from the other event. And it was led by our customer strategy team. So really offered invaluable advice from kind of their day-to-day world and allowed attendees to like ask questions and really get trained up. So we kind of thought about all the different audiences and what mattered to them and created experiences that fit their needs.
But this is going to be a off the cuff question here. When going back to the executive events, I feel like this is sort of the spot that a lot of people that I have spoken to are having trouble with, is that C-suite and really making sure that they have the attention, because I'm sure they get invited to everything. They're sick of being in front of their computers, obviously very busy schedules, and making sure that they attend. When you're doing the one-on-one experiences, are these small groups? Are you able to sort of facilitate networking when they're doing these experiences, or how does that work?
Yeah, so the way we built it was that the first half an hour, the speaker presented like completely new intel that they hadn't presented anywhere else. And then we broke out into groups of our executives, and they actually, we probably did about 50 people, we did groups of like 10, and they actually, our moderators, our executives would have like questions to get everybody talking about the subject that was just discussed. And then the speaker went room to room, and they got to ask them questions directly. And the groups ended up being so engaging because it was a small group, and our moderator specifically was asking like these burning kind of questions where people got to speak up, that people ended up after our first event requesting contact info of their groups, which we weren't anticipating. So we baked that into the event, and then afterwards people could actually opt in to share contact info of their group, and they stayed in touch. So it ended up being really successful because the topics were what they cared about too. Like, I think that's really important.
I think that's been one of the trickier ones I know for our company, and I know for others too, is really getting to that C-suite. So thank you for that insight there. So looking into our crystal ball here for a second, are we embracing virtual as the new go-to, or do you foresee hybrid events becoming the new normal? And if so, how are you embracing this new normal, your sales teams, as the new way of marketing? I know there was a lot of questions in one question, but so are we embracing virtual? Are we embracing hybrid? What do you see as the future? Natalia, I'll kick it off to you first to answer that one.
Sure. I feel like every time I hear the word hybrid, I like get a little agita. Because I feel like people just imagine that you're going to now stick a camera everywhere that you go. And that's definitely not what I recommend. I don't think everything needs to be hybrid. I think it's a little bit of a buzzword that's being overused, like event in a box, which by the way, that also doesn't exist. But but I think you just pick experience that makes sense for that format. You don't want to inadvertently create a feeling of missing out for the people that are virtual when there's a live event too. Like, you have to be sensitive there. I think instead of thinking about hybrid events and making events hybrid, think about a hybrid strategy instead. So some events are live only, like ones that are focused on networking. Some events are hybrid that are like larger scale. Like, I'm thinking about for my big virtual customer conference, having viewing parties around the country and then having people network after in their local markets. And then some events are just virtual. I'm planning on keeping our day-to-day workshop just virtual. If something's purely educational, there's absolutely no need to have it in person. I think it works much better when people can enjoy it from home. I think for like sales, virtual events are just really tough for networking. It's been the biggest pain by far. I mean, and that's definitely something that we plan on making live.
Love your feedback on this one.
Kurt or Kimber? Go for it, Kurt.
Okay. So what I would say is, I think Natalia hit this one on the head. I mean, the reality is, I think it's just like any other piece of content. Like, you have to understand what's your audience and what's your desired outcome, and that will help you determine what's the right format. I think there are some events which, if they're highly curated, are great to have in a hybrid format, or even ideally like local in person. I mean, at some point in time, some states will allow some small groups to do something, and I think those are going to be highly coveted events. And so if you think about like, how do I get senior people, whether it is a wine tasting or a steak dinner or whatever it is, like, people are going to want to get out and do those things. When it comes to the big events, I think, the challenge with hybrid is I don't have 8 hours to spend going through content, right? And like figuring out what's applicable. So if there's a way to say we're doing this big, massive 3-day event, but here's the tracks that are most relevant to you, and this is really 4 hours of your time, that's huge. And if I happen to be in the city or can get to the location, then I'll do that. And I think like just one of the great examples is early on was like Dreamforce, where they tried to do multiple cities. I'm not plugging anybody. It was a very interesting model where there were in-person events in major sort of Salesforce.com offices, but then the rest of it was virtual. And I think that's a really interesting format for people that feel comfortable coming out for whatever reason that is. They'll come out and they'll network, right? And for those that don't, virtual is a great way to consume that content. But we all miss the breakfasts or cocktail receptions or whatever it is that went along with events where you can actually just connect with people. It wasn't necessarily a selling motion. It was just this way to build a rapport and to network. Virtual just doesn't do a great job at that. I mean, you can try, but it really doesn't. There's actually special groups and associations I belong to. This one called Lunch Club, where I randomly meet up with people for an hour, and just a great way to sort of scratch that itch of like meeting random strangers in a safe environment. So maybe this is something I like to do. But my point is, like, there are ways to do that stuff successfully virtually, but you have to be very, very focused on that. So I think hybrid is this overused term. I think we really got to start with what's our desired outcome in our audience and sort of work our way backwards. I also think one-off events, and that's the part that scares me the most, is that now when things start opening up, people are like, oh yeah, now we can just have more events. But I think we have to look at events in correlation to the buyer's journey, and that this is just one of many touch points. And so where does it fit? And then based on that fit, how are we going to get these people in this virtual or hybrid or in-person the best approach? Yeah, I mean, that's my perspective.
Yeah.
Kimber, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and keep beating this dead horse. Just because you can do it doesn't mean you should. That with hybrid, I think hybrid in the beginning was something that we talked about almost as a safety precaution of like, okay, we're going to plan for hybrid in case we can't be in person. We'll already have the virtual piece of it built out. So to both of your points, I think we're going to be optimizing for the live in-person experience and balancing that with the expectations of if people now expect to be able to tune in and stream virtually. And I think what will be important is finding tools that make a hybrid approach, if you choose to do that, really easy, because hybrid can be more expensive and it's definitely more time consuming on your team's time. And you want to make sure that you're optimizing for the outcomes and not spending all of your time on something that is going to end up not being engaged with. I feel like for our big conferences, what we'll probably go back to doing is really, really pushing for people to come and attend in person and get the value out of the in-person events that we feel are the most important. And then streaming the most important keynotes, like to Kurt's point, like selecting what is the most important content that we do want to make broadly applicable, and stream those things for everyone ungated. And if they want to consume it that way, they can, but we're continuing to keep the value of coming and engaging with us in person. I think people are gonna be hungry to come back in person to do those things. And then to Natalia's point too, that the things that make more sense in virtual will just stay virtual, and we won't try to find a way to do those things in person. We'll just continue with the things that work now.
Can you guys hear me? Okay. Sorry, I was having audio issues.
Yeah.
Continuing on to that point then, are you seeing any existing technologies or platforms that you're leveraging right now for hybrid events, or have seen anything that you know is coming out that is really helping you to succeed and that's helping you while you're thinking about developing content for these types of audiences? I don't know, Kimber, if you're thinking about sort of talking about the tools. I don't know if you've seen anything that you've been using.
Yeah. So I've been keeping on top of kind of all of the virtual tools. I've somehow become like the de facto virtual tool person. And I hesitate to actually share a name of any of them because I think they're all evolving so quickly. It's really hard to see who has kind of the most important features. But I would say that if you're looking at tools, the ones if you are choosing to do hybrid, look for ones that have easy mobile apps that work really seamlessly with the event itself, because that way people in the room on their phones or at home on their phones can be engaging with polls, engaging with the content, and it will make it easier on your team to execute a hybrid strategy without doubling their efforts. Yeah, that's my
I love it.
best
And
non-answer.
Kurt, do you have any suggestions?
Well, we sell solutions in this space, so I'm not going to plug us, but I think one of the best things that I've seen come out of rethinking events is how people are using Slack. So the apps are awesome when you're on site, but I think Slack is a way to have an ongoing relationship and dialogue. And there's cool features, something called Donut, where they randomly match you up with people. And so if you get people to join the Slack channel before the event and start making introductions over Slack, I think when people arrive, boots on the ground, it's just great that they already know 4 or 5 people that they've met virtually. And now, just because we've all been confined for some extended period of time, they're actually going to put in the cycles to go meet. It used to be at a lot of these events, like the event was over and people were like, I'm going back to the room to work. I think now what people are going to say is like, forget about doing work. Like, I've been working in my room for a long time. I'm going to invest in these relationships. And so, I think Slack, it lives forever. That's the one challenge. I mean, I have lots of mobile apps from the events I've been on, but eventually they die. But it seems like Slack is a little bit more pervasive. The one thing I completely agree with what Kimber said is the requirements have changed. And so every company is sort of playing catch up in the tech space. And like anything else, I think you need to figure out what the event is and what the goals of the event are and make a software purchase decision specific to that event. In a year, it could be completely out of date. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen in 3 months. So I think you just got to deal in that sort of reality. So I think it changes the purchase decision of what's important in the tech now. But there's lots of cool companies trying to solve this. The biggest thing has to be engagement.
And have you been to any events, without naming names, of maybe specific platforms that you've seen this done really well, maybe for virtual, or you're like, wow, this has blown me away? I mean, we've done a global conference where on the back end, it was like building the most complicated Lego box you could possibly think of, like between trying to get our back end platform, our sales teams, like Marketo, Salesforce, like everything linked together. So I don't know. And then the production was fine. It was good, but it was such a struggle to get that up and running. I don't know if you've been to something where you're like, wow, this seems so seamless. They've done a great job. It was really engaging. Even talking to the folks at Demexco, they were like, this is going to be Netflix and LinkedIn and this. And then we got there, it was like virtually got there and we're like, ooh, this maybe wasn't exactly what they were hoping for. Just curious your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, there's 2 that really stand out to me. So just earlier this week, I attended a virtual event and they took us to the Grand Bazaar in Istanbul. And we started off the event on the rooftops, which you see in like the James Bond movies and stuff like that. But then we got a tour of the Grand Bazaar, which was closed because there's all these new COVID protocols, but it was really cool to see. And the great thing is the audience was all sales and marketing people, and they talked to people that run these shops they see, in the height of things, they were seeing tens to hundreds of thousands of people go through the Grand Bazaar. And they talked about how they marketed and how did they sell in basically 45 seconds, because that's all they have. And so it was interesting, is like, it was this awesome, engaging experience because not many people have been to the Grand Bazaar. And then to hear, and then to tie it back to this relevant message of how do you make an impression in sort of this 45 seconds, and how do you humanize yourself, I think was really great for the audience. For me, that was awesome. And they did a tie-in. They sent like a Turkish, I just moved it so no one could see it, but like a Turkish coffee pot and coffee, and just a great way to tie together the whole experience. And they started off with telling us about coffee and how important it is in the culture. So that was an awesome experience. And everybody was just like, wow. Now the production wasn't great, but I'll tell you, you had empathy from the marketing people that this is what they do for a living. So they're like, these things are god awful, horrible, and you're around the world. And but it was clever. They walked around with like an AirPod that was the microphone, and the girl had the AirPod in the other ear, and all of us were like amazing tech hack. So I think that was really cool. I think it depends on your audience. And then the other one I attended was for CROs only. There were about 20 CROs, and they sent you a bottle of whatever your favorite drink was, which was great. But what they brought was a leader from a venture capital firm that talked about how important predictable revenue is to going public. And so this is like sort of top of mind for every CRO and every CEO is like, how do we build these sustainable companies? What are the building blocks that allow us to get to a Series B, C, or to go public? So to have a really coveted name, like everybody wanted to hear what this individual said for the first 45 minutes. And then the birds of a feather, the people that you were there with, you're like, oh my, like I'm trying to sell to this guy and this lady's trying to sell to me. And so it was great from just a connection standpoint. But again, it was a small group. I mean, the tiles they were using a particular product that we all use for virtual events, but I could actually see people's names. I could see their faces, and I had a time to make a personal connection. And they set up a Slack channel, which people voluntarily, joined. And so now we still share random best practices, how do you forecast, set quotas, all this sort of stuff. So I think that's awesome. Now, having said that, I have not bought the product from the company that sponsored these events, but I talk about them often because there's so many things I need to get in order to be ready for their solution. But I'm ready to buy as soon as I'm qualified and there's things I need to do. And so I think that's what's super important about these events is we used to have this myopic short-term perspective of I'm getting butts in seats and this is what my conversion funnel looks like. And I think now it's evolved to where we really need to engage not once, but many times with them to build that trusted advisor status to sort of move them through the process. So we have to give before we get, particularly now in this, people need help, like in a variety of different ways. So it's not a political message or anything else. But we just need to help people be successful, and that will come back in spades.
That was great. Thank you. That actually sounds super cool. I kind of I want to get an invite to that. We only have 2 questions left, and then we'll go to audience questions. So make sure to enter your audience questions in. This question is for Natalia. What does the future of event marketing look like for your organization? Any new strategies you are looking to implement?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're going to go back to some live events, but I think just looking at the goals for like proprietary events, we're looking at education versus networking. We're thinking about what events we keep, which ones we add hybrid elements to, like the viewing parties I mentioned. People have really learned to love virtual events too. I think we do miss live events and the networking, but I think there's some people and whose maybe life situations or where they live don't really allow them to travel. And I think what we have to kind of remember is that those virtual events are now something that's key in their life and they learn to love them. We don't want to take away things that people love from them now that like live events are coming back. I think you have to keep that in mind, and always as a North Star is that there is different audiences and different kind of ways people consume content. We will definitely sunset some events, and probably some sponsorships now that people are going back to live. I think there's going to be less of an appetite for virtual events, and the ones that survive really have to be tapping into that kind of blend of life, of travel, of like other priorities, and you're not sitting in front of your computer the whole day. I think we'll probably cut down on some virtual sponsorship the way we were omnipresent. And, like last week we sponsored 4 events. So that's probably not something we're going to be doing going forward because live events just take way longer to plan. And we also have to balance the workload of our employees and where we have engagement. So I think what's been great about last year is due to price points. I was able to test virtually every conference in my space. And now I know what works. I know what sponsorship kind of engagements work. I found, for example, that having one-on-one meetings with sponsorship works really well. So I shifted some events to just be that. We don't need to speak everywhere. We don't need to have certain engagements everywhere, and just becoming really kind of strategic about everything you engage with now. But I don't think it's going to be easy. And I think it's still kind of a guessing game, and the world is shifting every week. Every week that public perception of what is going to happen changes. And that's something that's going to be definitely the biggest challenge in planning the year ahead. I think something I'm thinking about also is starting local. I don't think I think there's a social anxiety element to going back to live events. it's not just about like being scared to get COVID, but like being around a lot of people now, having conversations,
Putting on
can
like
be,
real
a little
pants.
intimidating. So I think yeah, makeup. It took forever to put this on today. But so we're thinking about starting local and small and like rolling it out sort of slowly and seeing how people feel, really like asking our customers, what are you comfortable
Awesome.
with?
Yeah. Is there one event that you're looking forward to returning live?
Yeah, and like networking events like dinners and parties and like local kind of field marketing events. I'm definitely really looking forward to meeting the customers I met over Zoom in person.
And for our last question before we open it up, Natalia and Kimber, do you have any final recommendations for remaining agile and continuing to prepare for the unknown? Kimber, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think one of the successful strategies that we learned over the last year, because like Natalia said, things are always changing and always evolving, was really planning for the short term versus the long term. So we all know what the long-term goals look like, but in the short term, we can look at our customers and go, what's the pain point that they need to solve in the next 90 days? And what's the program I can put together to help them get there? And so if we kept looking at their needs and how their needs were shifting and building programs for that, it meant that we didn't have to waste cycles throwing out those plans we made a year ago because everything has changed since then. So I think that's something that we're gonna keep doing. I knock on all of the wood that we never have an unknown as big as COVID that we have to plan for again. But I do think that those shorter iterative cycles are a tactic that will continue to work for us moving forward.
Natalia?
Yeah, definitely agree there. Like, don't throw all your ideas away and just start from scratch. There's so many great things that we learned in the last year. And I think one of those is to be agile. I think a lot of us didn't know how we would survive this. And we kind of, I feel like the community of event marketers too, it's something that I learned a lot is I don't think I've ever networked so much with the event marketing community. I'm in a bunch of Slacks now. I'm actually hosting like a meetup for 20 people next Friday to talk about safety measures because I don't really know how to approach it. So I put an ask out there and I'm like, let's talk. And I think that's great. Like, use your community. Don't feel like you have to solve everything yourself. I feel like people come to me and ask me this and I'm like, I don't know. I know as much as you do. Like when people were asking forever, like, when do live events go back? Like, I know as much as you do. Like, lean on your community, lean on events like this, tune in and hear what other people have to say. But something else I would add is we're moving forward with events is always think about your customer and your audience, like what matters to them today. This doesn't just apply to the pandemic. It applies to civil rights movements, any other culture and technology shifts. Be sensitive to that. I think as I'm thinking about, we just had a brainstorm yesterday with my team about our first live events. Be empathetic. This is probably many people's first time traveling or going to a live event. Make sure you're sensitive to what matters to them. Like, I'm thinking about live music. Everybody misses live music. We have to have that. But also can they invite a personal guest? Because especially if they're traveling, this may be their first trip and they want to bring somebody with them. So just being empathetic and thinking about what matters to human beings, we're people first. And as event marketers, we have this unique space we live in where we get to make people feel something. So definitely lean on that. I think people forgive a lot of errors and technical glitches when you make them feel like they're part of a community. And
that is so true. That's such a great way to sort of segue into the audience Q&A, but I love kind of thinking people first and not as audience and not as customers, but as actual humans. I think that's a great way to sort of even just wrap this up. Kind of shifting towards our Q&A section, since we have about 15 minutes left of this. I'm going to open this up to all three of you. So we have 3 questions right now from the audience. First being, what kind of virtual hospitality events have you hosted, which have been successful, and which ones have not? I know it sounds like we've used a couple examples of which ones have been really successful, but would love to hear if anyone has any additional feedback there.
I'll throw another one in there that because we've talked about like the wine tastings and the cocktail hours that we've done virtually. Another one that we ran that was really successful was we it sounds so hokey, but we used a magician. We were sponsoring an event that used to be hosted in Las Vegas, so we got a Vegas magician on, and we actually really marketed it as a family event. So like, come tune into this, bring your kids. And that was a tactic we'd never been able to try before because normally people aren't traveling with their full family. And it was, we had huge attendance numbers. People were really happy. They were also really grateful to provide something that was for their kids because I think a lot of parents are being sensitive to, to audience needs, right? What are something that we can do that doesn't have anything to do with what we sell, but it's just providing value and building that great brand affinity and that good relationship. And then, but being sensitive to the audiences too. That would have never worked if we were trying to do that with a C-suite. I think there were a couple events, I won't say what they are, but I think that the team members just didn't quite pick the right engagement approach for the audience and learned that lesson of, always come with what's top of mind for them.
Kirk, Natalia, do you have anything, or we could go on to the next?
The one thing I've seen is, and we've shifted to this where we used to do maybe we'd let people pick their favorite bottle of alcohol or a meal, is we actually use a service that just gives them a gift card so they can apply it to whatever they want, right? I think like choice is huge. It goes back to that empathy thing. Not everybody consumes alcohol and not everybody needs to have lunch catered in or whatever it is. And so giving them, $25 or $50 to spend out whatever, we used to always default to like an Amazon gift card or a Starbucks card, but that flexibility I think is important. And then the other thing we've noticed is, believe it or not, even enabling them to give to a charity or an organization they care about, that's equally important. I think empathy that's very important. I think empathy and engagement kind of go hand in hand when we're talking, marketing, selling to our customers and our prospects. And so thinking through what that looks like is phenomenal.
I'll just add to that I think like a good gift these days could be like a workout or like a news membership after chef nights and alcohol tastings. I think something I noticed that doesn't work well, is when you don't have a strong host for these virtual events, because keep the conversation rolling on the Zoom is like pulling teeth. And so we have somebody on our team who is like the best host. I mean, she will get people to stay like an hour after. I think a great host is really important. So think about that and have a plan of questions you're asking people that are fun. Like, we just had a roundtable at our conference, and one of the icebreaker questions I had was, because we're an SMS company, like, what was your first cell phone? What year did you get your first cell phone? What kind of cell phone? And people just love talking about it. Like, how much they miss the sidekick? Like something that's not your business, but personal, like something that people are going to think about. What would you be excited to answer if somebody asked you and you would go off mute?
That's so funny. Oh, the sidekick. I think I had mine, like, I was envious of Paris Hilton's like Bejeweled one. Anyway, moving on. For the group, can you comment on data that you're receiving from virtual versus live events and how the former informs your strategy and practice? So talking a little bit about metrics here.
I'll kick us off. I think one of the great things about virtual events is you actually get so much more engagement data. You know exactly what assets attendees have touched, what people they've connected with, what sessions they've attended. And some of that data is data that is harder to get through a live program. And that's allowed us to better inform how we score those leads and how we bubble kind of like the cream of the crop to the top for our sales teams. So they know who are the warmest leads for them to reach out to first. I think that's the biggest thing with data that we've been able to do is better inform our follow-up strategy.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Yeah, go ahead, Natalia.
I definitely think like having like the email addresses and all that contact info is great, especially if you can get a pre-event. I think like we played a lot of guessing games in live events where we just like reach out to anyone that we thought might be attending that event. So I think the data is really powerful, like how people engage. We'll definitely miss that in live events. And I think, I think now that we learned that it's possible for virtual events, maybe people will innovate and try to figure it out for live.
Yeah, I think some of these virtual event solutions, maybe like the one we're using now, and I'm not going to plug, but tell you like how long the duration, they fill out the poll, did they download the content, did they engage in chat, and even was the event their primary tab while the event was going on, right? So there's lots of people that just sort of show up and hit the play button, primarily because it blocks out time on their calendar, right? But so they don't have to do anything else, but then they go off and they do something else. There are solutions that tell you if they're actually engaged with the event as it's happening. And so I think all that helps with lead scoring and signaling, which is really important. I think the other thing is a lot of these tools now allow you to keep all this content together. So you can actually go through and figure out when did people start asking questions, because now I can improve the content, the flow, presentation, and all that's really important. So we want to know more about the people that attend. We also want to know, like, if we go back to engagement being important, when did people start actually getting engaged in the presentation? And can I curate and reduce the content or change it so that engagement lasts longer or occurs earlier? So I think
we started using the engagement and attention metrics. I believe it was on WebEx, and we did it the first time, didn't tell anyone, for an internal presentation. And it was really amusing to see the results of that. And I don't think, the team was very happy that we were sharing those metrics. But it is a valuable tool where you're seeing where did the drop off happen? Was it, how far in? And it's helpful, especially if you're looking back at the content. But that is a great flag. We have a couple more questions, only a couple of minutes. So really quickly, I know, Natalia, you talked about this briefly, but how are you ensuring that live events are safe? What precautions must be taken while planning a hybrid event? Or is this something you guys are still, or you all are still sort of thinking through?
Yeah, definitely still thinking through it. I read a really interesting report on it actually last night, and that's part of the reason why I'm like bringing a bunch of marketers together to talk about it. I think what's really, really tricky, it's like the COVID and the vaccines and testing and masks are not a health issue, but they're also a political issue. And the kind of overcoming that and how people feel and how they'll perceive your safety precautions is also something they need to be aware of. It's not just like, are you being safe, but like, are you going to like piss people off that maybe feel differently, or are you going to piss people off because like they're on the super safe spectrum or not, So I think just being really cognizant of how people feel and like respecting opinions, but also putting kind of the rules down of what you expect for events. Something interesting I read in this report was having your registrants check off terms and conditions like you would for participating in anything where you're accepting liability, and here you're agreeing to whatever the rules of that event are, whether that's proof of vaccine or having a test 3 days earlier. I think that's a smart idea, and just being super communicative about it, whatever you decide. I think for something like travel, you can definitely err on the side of requiring a lot more testing or vaccines, but for something like a local event, it's really tricky. So those are some things you need to think through as you're planning those.
All right, we have time for, it looks like probably one more question. I guess, what is the biggest way the pandemic has affected event marketing? And do you think event marketing will ever be the same? I know it's a very lofty question.
I think the biggest way I would say is all three of us on this call had to learn how to be broadcasters in the last year, not just event marketers. And I think that's a skill set we'll all carry forward. But that was probably the biggest thing. Producing a virtual event, in my opinion, is far harder than an in-person event. And we all had to learn that very, very quickly. So I think if you have an event marketing team, go pat them on the back. You can't pat them on the back when you can't tell them they did a great job this year, because it was not easy. And I don't know that event marketing will ever be the same, because I don't think the world is ever going to be exactly the same either. And I think that there were shifts that were happening in event marketing that were happening before the pandemic that just shifted faster. I think a lot of people were moving away from these huge, huge conferences where it was all about volume, and they were already seeking those more intimate experiences. And it just made us get there faster. That's my 2 cents.
I also think as an event marketer, I think event marketers in general in the past were always like the most creative, solution-oriented people because you're constantly having to like fix problems, basically. Like you can prepare for the best, but then the whole entire event you're just fixing problems. So I think like naturally they were predisposed to be great at adapting to the pandemic, unlike a lot of industries or professions.
I agree. I was like sad at the very beginning of the pandemic. There was a lot of companies who let go of their event marketers, and I was like, "You just let go of the best problem solver on your team, and you have a huge opportunity for them to pivot to something." And you watch those companies then struggle when every other company moved to virtual, and they didn't have anybody on their team to do that for them anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, what I saw the biggest change is, I think, a greater appreciation for what event marketers actually do. You know, it isn't, they're not planning and just, you know, welcoming people to the door, which is what like salespeople see. Like, oh, so-and-so showing up and telling me, here's my registration count. And then when I show up, they give me my badge and they tell me what to do. I think they realize these people are strategic. Just exactly what Kimber and Natalie are saying is that they're a really, really valuable part, and they localize the strategy that we have in marketing. I mean, the reality is, you know, when events are in person or virtual, there still is this human interaction that's required. And we can send out all the emails through HubSpot and these other things, but someone has to be there to greet them virtually or in person. And someone has to understand the message and the goals and what are we trying to accomplish. And I think that's what event marketers have been doing. We just haven't really appreciated the value that they provide. So I think like that was the single biggest change. I think event marketing has changed forever. I think the biggest challenge we have right now is we still have marketing leaders that don't realize that the cheese has moved, right? They're not what I would consider enlightened marketers. They don't realize that it's not just about butts and seats, that it really is about quality over quantity. And a lot of things that Kimber and Natalie talked about, they clearly understand that the world has changed and it's not going back to the way it was. The problem is the further you get removed from the customer, which is what happens in companies as you go further up the ladder, the less you realize how important these events are in establishing and engaging with your customer as they go through their journey. And I guess that's the one big fear that I have is that we saw the same thing. We saw lots of people say, hey, there's no in-person events. I'm just shutting it down. And that doesn't work. The customer will just go buy somewhere else. They will go find information from someone else. And so I think this becomes a great equalizer for small, scrappy, enlightened marketers to do a lot more with less and have significant impact in their business.
This has been such a fantastic panel. I want to thank you all so much. I have a few key takeaways. I've been furiously taking notes throughout this. My key takeaways are quality over quantity, hyper targeting and tailored content, audience first, what matters, make sure you understand what matters to them today and be sensitive. Pick the experience, hybrid, virtual, in person, that makes the most sense for what you're trying to achieve. Be agile and lean on your community. Any final thoughts from any of you before we close out and I kick it back to Brittany? Awesome.
Great summary. That's a great summary.
Those are snippy months and we've lived it.
Well, thank you again so much to Kimber, Natalia, and Kurt for all of your insights. This is super helpful, and I'm hoping it helped everyone else who is on this call. We look forward to seeing what happens next. I mean, things change at the hour at this rate. So yeah, Brittany, I'll hand it back over to you.
This does conclude today's webinar. I also want to thank everyone who joined us for this fantastic virtual event. And thank you once again to our partner, Bonsai. This webinar will be available on demand following this webinar. Thank you everyone again, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, guys.